起来，一二，起来，不愿做奴隶人们，把我们的血肉注入我们心上中。中华民族的样子最危险的时候，每个人被拍着发出最后的吼声。起来，起来，起来，我们万众一心，冒着心好火，前进，前进，前进进。
Tiananmen Square is the traditional heart of Beijing. It is dominated by important symbols of the revolution and the state. It has often seen crowds of more than 1 million people gathered here to celebrate or protest. This square has witnessed the most triumphant and most tragic moments in the story of the People's Liberation Army. The memory of Mao Zedong as the founder of the state is still revered in China. As he lies in his crystal coffin, ordinary people flock to see him, some to pay homage, others just curious. He was also the principal architect of the PLA. From its birth on the 1st of August 1927, he shaped it as a political weapon, first to achieve power and then to hang on to it. The sweep of China's history has always been violent and bloody, and the country has only ever been unified under the sword. The entombed warriors are all that remain of the mighty army of Qin, first emperor of China. Mao liked to compare himself to the bloodthirsty Qin, who had also welded the country together by force. The art of war is vital to the state. So wrote Sun Tzu. Mao owed his military genius to this ancient philosopher who taught that the battlefield which really counts is in the minds of men, that this is where wars are won and lost.
这往马尾巴字儿低了的，所以应该像那个的，对，马尾巴应该是散开的，对，没错，它卷起来了，变成一个球状。
The fearsome Emperor Qin took his army with him to the grave. Mao left his behind. It has been the main pillar of the communist regime, at times its only pillar. Mao said, "Our principle is that the party commands the gun, and the gun must never be allowed to command the party." The Red Army had been founded by the party to get the communists into power. But what a problem they faced. Not only a corrupt and powerful nationalist government, but invasion on a huge scale from the Japanese. The communists and the nationalists decided to join forces before the country was overrun. But, as in any war, it was the ordinary people who suffered the most.
Well, as for the Japanese devils, when they were here, life was impossible for us ordinary folk. We just scattered to the four winds. We were without homes, without jobs.
Like countless others across China, the prosperous little village of Ranzhuang was the scene of numerous battles. The people simply refused to give in.
Even if we young people weren't actually killed at that time, it was as good as being half dead. They killed our people and aroused our hatred, and we really hated them. They had a three-part policy to burn everything, kill everyone, and loot everything. Us ordinary folk were in a terrible state. We tried to think of every possible way to fight back against the Japanese devils.
At the time of the Tunnel War, I was in the children's group. The children's group were supposed to stand at the entrance of the village with spears in our hands to keep watch for the spies from the Japanese devils. Here they fought 72 tunnel battles and won them all. They won every single time.
China is honeycombed with thousands of kilometers of tunnels like this. From them, the civilians struck back at the Japanese. Mao saw strength where others saw only weakness, in China's vast peasant population. He realized that nothing could defeat the people if they were motivated to resist. He called this People's War. Wearing the red scarf of the young pioneers is the first sign that you have what it takes to join the party. And good party members must know their history.
In the 72 battles during the 8 years we fought the Japanese devils, no one on our side died.
China and Japan are now officially friends, but the Japanese atrocities scarred the Chinese so deeply that bitterness is still felt by ordinary people.
先锋先锋，热血沸腾，先烈为平等牺牲，做人类解放救星，侧耳远听，宇宙充满极鼾声，警醒先锋，个人自由全牺牲。我是国生，我是有用。神虽是精神长生，承认成功，实现大同。
World War II, the race for China began between the communists and the nationalists. It was full-scale civil war.
The Americans and Russians wrote off the communists in 1945, but the Chinese people did not write them off. They had laid a basis of warm support throughout the country, and they had learned the tactics whereby a small force could defeat a large force.
Mao once said, if the Red Army is good at anything, it's running away. Striking when least expected and avoiding pitched battles were at the heart of the communist strategy. Simple in nature, these guerrilla tactics devastated a nationalist army equipped with millions of dollars of American aid.
The theory we will discuss today is Mao Zedong's military ideas, including how to direct a war from a complete strategic viewpoint.
Mao's tactics are still the model for modern guerrilla warfare. They are taught today in military academies in the West as well as in China. Mao was well served by the brilliance of his commanders, in particular Marshal Lin Biao. They captured large numbers of nationalist weapons and turned them back on the enemy. People saw that Mao's men would do anything, obey any order, make any sacrifice. They proudly proclaimed themselves the People's Liberation Army.
The PLA achieved an extraordinary military success, which could only have been achieved with the backing of the peasant population. Unfortunately, Chiang Kai-shek was hostile to the peasants, treated them as cannon fodder, and the Red Army continued to treat them as their friends and allies.
It wasn't only the peasants who were won over. If you deserted from the nationalists, you were not punished, but accepted by the communists as one of their own. After every battle, the size of the PLA grew. As their flag was lowered over China, the nationalists were already fleeing to Taiwan. The utopian society had arrived. For the first time, tanks and troops of the People's Liberation Army rolled into Beijing. People took to the streets in their millions. The welcome was ecstatic.
Chairman Mao was standing on the gate of heavenly peace. Then he announced that today the Chinese People's Republic is established. The Central People's Government had been founded, and the Chinese people have stood up!
I can remember Mao Zedong. He had a very squeaky voice, shouting out, "The Chinese have at last stood up." And we all cheered and we were all crying because this was the most wonderful feeling, and the whole crowd were so full of admiration and love.
Commander Ma is in charge of the North Sea Fleet. In the pecking order of the PLA, he ranks very highly. He's been with the Navy since its very beginning.
In 1949, we mainly relied on warships and boats seized from the Kuomintang. From the mid-50s to the late 50s, we bought some from the Soviet Union. The Navy was founded on the same basis as the ground force. Now our goal is to build up a People's Navy with Chinese character.
The Navy was founded as part of the Army and followed the same pattern. At its very core was uniformity of thought. Here, a fast attack craft captain reads the PLA newspaper to his men. It's the party's way of communicating directly to the rank and file. They called it a People's Navy, but this was to be a political force, its duty to carry out the directives of the Communist Party. As the PLA manifesto declared, all our officers and fighters must bear in mind that we are the great People's Liberation Army. We are the troops led by the great Communist Party of China. Provided we constantly observe the directives of the party, we are sure to win.
We are the People's Army. The leadership is the party. The political work is for implementing the party's directives, guidelines and policies.
军旗飘好浪花涌，预备，唱。军旗飘好浪花涌，我们家乡之主政，充满庄严，密切协同，纵横驰骋，点对线为锋。我们是导弹快精灵，保卫祖国还将建奇功。 我们是导弹快精兵，保卫祖国还将建奇功。
The Navy was to be Mao's stepping stone to Taiwan, to where the nationalists had fled. But before the island could be recaptured, another conflict exploded on China's doorstep. Urged on by the Soviet Union, Mao threw the PLA into the Korean War. It was their first action outside China's borders, and the first time the West had a glimpse of a new kind of soldier.
They could come up to within 10 or 15 feet very quietly, and then the whistle would be blown or the trumpet would be blown, and next thing you've got a rush on. Well, there was just no stopping them. I mean, if their ranks were cut down, they were just reinforced almost immediately. Once the first wave fell, there'd just be another wave to take their place, and someone would blow a trumpet, and they just vanished back into the scrub again.
They were tough, they were brave, and with relatively crude weapons, they were very effective.
In fact, many Chinese soldiers carried no weapons at all. For Mao, it was not weapons that mattered, but men. And undaunted, the PLA tackled the full might of the United States Army.
The political officers had an important part to play in reminding them what they were there for. And they believed, from a morale point of view, absolutely in the right of what they were doing. That was an important factor.
Casualties and death just didn't seem to worry them at all. They just kept coming and coming.
They drove the Americans into the longest retreat in their history. But the triumph was short-lived. The Allied forces recovered and the PLA suffered massive losses. But now, with Russian arms, methods, and a new system of ranks, the face of Mao's peasant army had been transformed, and the party had a new task for them. Chinese will tell you that Tibet has always been a part of the sacred motherland. But Tibetans are another people with their own distinctive culture and spiritual life. To Communist China, this is irrelevant.
The entire world recognizes that Tibet is an indivisible part of China.
The PLA occupied Lhasa in 1950, while the world turned a blind eye. The new emperor in Beijing demanded that homage be paid.
Five-starred red flag of our motherland flutters high over Lhasa.
The PLA still acts like an army of occupation, insensitively showing the flag. Tibet is strategically vital to China and a useful launching pad for its nuclear arsenal. The PLA won't discuss these things. The official position of the government installed by the Chinese is that there are other reasons for stationing 250,000 soldiers here.
Every country has its own army to protect itself. Our Tibet is part of the People's Republic of China. First, the Chinese People's Liberation Army is there to protect our country and our people. If this great war of iron did not exist, there would be no guarantee for peaceful construction and happiness.
The Buddhist religion is at the heart of Tibetan culture. The Chinese have set out to demolish the importance of religion in Tibetan life. Though these pilgrims are tolerated at the Jokhan temple, they are regarded by the communists as primitive and superstitious. They are a constant affront to the party.
Since Tibet was peacefully liberated, relations between the Han and the Tibetan nationalities have been relations of genuine equality, unity, and cooperation.
PLA propaganda films are at pains to demonstrate the success of this relationship. Some Tibetans have other memories.
During 1950s, nomad groups have been killed by Chinese Liberation Army, which I remember now. Maybe 100 families. Before dawn comes, the Chinese soldiers went and rounded them and ready to shoot down. And when dawn comes, they started to shoot down everything. Cow or yak or horse, dog, cat, children, women, old, everything shoot down. Maybe all together, man and animal, everything, maybe thousands been shut down. That I know. I'm not criticizing Chinese, but I'm telling you the fact.
Tibetan fears of cultural, if not actual, genocide led to a full-scale uprising in 1959. The PLA was called in to suppress it. the Tibetans, the Dalai Lama is their god king. Threatened by the Chinese show of force, he escaped to India, where he has remained in exile ever since. Tibet lives under a shadow of terror as the Chinese government makes it clear it will not allow freedom of speech or thought.
The fundamental reason for the disturbances is that there are people who demand independence for Tibet, to separate Tibet from China. That's the main reason. The disturbances didn't happen because of any problem in the unity of the two nationalities. But of course, a small number of separatists are hanging out two banners. The banner of nationalism and of religion, to deceive people and push for Tibetan independence. An independent Tibet is impossible. Semi-independence is impossible. Any form of independence is impossible. This is not practical.
The suppression of thought, the fact that you weren't allowed to say what you think. There came a time when if you disagreed with Mao Zedong's policies, you had to spend 6 months in a labor camp. And I had been in a labor camp for criticizing one of Mao's policies, and I decided that was it. If this carried on and I stayed, I wouldn't be alive today.
July 1966, Mao announces the start of his great proletarian cultural revolution. Suppression of dissent was to reach a new crescendo.
The Cultural Revolution stemmed from internal conditions within China, and in particular within the Chinese Communist Party.
Accused of being a spy, Francis James was a prisoner of the PLA during the Cultural Revolution.
In a nutshell, the old man, who was then in his 70s, 72 or 73, when he made the famous swim in the Yangtze, you remember, swam 10 miles, rather faster than any Olympic swimmer would have done it, if the propaganda is to be believed. The old boy had considerable trouble within the upper reaches of the party itself. A lot of leading figures in China were becoming disillusioned with him and were certainly disagreeing with his points of view about many social, economic, political and so on questions.
And opposition was not something Mao would tolerate. He set out to eliminate his enemies in the party. Mao appealed directly to the young to carry out his revolutionary ideals. Gathered together from all over China with the logistic support of the army, millions of young people jammed Tiananmen Square. Mao dispatched his young Red Guards, as he called them, across China to smash the four olds. Old ideas, old culture, old customs, old habits. Mao's word was law. Revolutionary idealism soon turned to a mindless orgy of destruction. All forms of religion were attacked. Tibet suffered appallingly. Religious debate and practice, once the foundation of its government, were outlawed. The monasteries destroyed by the thousand. To this day, the PLA forbids filming of the ruins of Ganden Monastery, once one of the finest in Tibet. Fanatical Red Guards tore apart monasteries all over Tibet, often armed with PLA weapons. And some PLA units are believed to have been responsible for shelling Ganden. While they were bent on destroying other people's gods, the Chinese continued to worship one of their own. And Mao was exhorting people to learn from the PLA. army was held up as a shining example for the young. Whatever Mao said was done. The army discarded ranks and lived by the slogan, better read than expert. Their professionalism was in tatters, and if you didn't toe the Maoist line, you were purged.
Then they said I'd been poisoned and was poisoning the masses. They criticized me before anyone else. So Sun Yi was the first to be criticized in the whole army. At that time, I felt it was very unfair. You see, I made enthusiastic propaganda for revolutionary traditions. What's wrong with that?
Only the lucky survived. High office was no protection. Army leaders and party officials were publicly victimized. Some were later to return to rule China, like Deng Xiaoping. Others were imprisoned, tortured, and executed.
When these people were shot, of course, there'd be lots of propaganda made, and they'd have placards, what they had been responsible for. And this really stirred up the suppression of the Chinese, because they tend to suppress their emotions. But this was an outlet for them, and then you'd get a screaming, raging mob of hysteria, saying, kill them, kill them, kill them. And I can remember being in one where I got infected with it too. And I was so angry that I think if I'd had a chance to shoot those, I would have done it myself.
During the worst period of violence in the Cultural Revolution, the summer of 1967, you could not speak about the PLA, because suddenly the military commanders began to refuse to obey the orders from Peking. They knew that their troops were conservative peasant boys from the villages who would not countenance the kind of violence and anarchy and destructiveness that the Red Guards were carrying out in the name of Chairman Mao.
Red Guards, cruel, violent, torturing, and all the rest of it, yes. The PLA, no.
By 1968, there was no national organization left except the army. The marshals went to Mao and said, either you let us take over with martial law or there'll be civil war.
The army took over, not in a military coup, but to hold the country together. It meant undreamt of political power for the PLA.
Even during the Cultural Revolution in the army, the aim was the same, for the soldiers to serve the people. The People's Army must serve the people. That is the ultimate goal of our army, and it hasn't changed. The difference is that during the Cultural Revolution, the cult of personality, admiring Chairman Mao, got in the way of political education. Afterwards, we corrected that.
A whole generation was robbed of its education, its hopes, its dreams. China is still paying the price. The army seemed to be the only thing keeping the Communist Party in power. It was as though now the gun was in control of the party. This is as far north in China as you can go. Across the frozen Black Dragon River is Siberia. It's only autumn, but already it's 30 below zero. Looking north into the Soviet Union today, all is quiet.
2点25分。10号包左侧
Even the presence of a couple of Russian soldiers patrolling on the ice barely causes comment in the Chinese watchtower. But 20 years ago, it was a different story. It started over a disputed borderline when the former communist friends began a lethal game of push and shove. To a China caught up in the frenzy of the Cultural Revolution, this was deliberate provocation.
Fully armed Soviet provisions provocateurs pushed the bare-handed Chinese fishermen into the Heilong River. They are simply a bunch of insensate beasts without any sense of shame. Our lives may be sacrificed, but not a single inch of the sacred territory of our motherland must be lost. You Soviet provisions renegades, your saber-rattling anti-China activities cannot cover up your inherent weakness, and you will never escape your doom.
Anti-Soviet feeling reached fever pitch. To the rest of the world, it was an isolated squabble, but the PLA had shown it could play for higher stakes. They called it the Second Artillery. The split with Russia had made China determined to get the bomb. It was the one area of the PLA which was more expert than red. Within 3 years of its first atomic test, the PLA had exploded a hydrogen bomb. It was here that the world came as close as it ever has to the brink of nuclear war. The Soviet Union considered obliterating China's nuclear installations. The world held its breath. As they had done a generation before, the Chinese people went underground. Mao said, dig deep tunnels, and dig they did. A civilian mobilization to rival the construction of the pyramids or the Great Wall itself. The tunnels still contribute to China's defenses. These days, it's by earning money. You can stay here in the Northern Beauty Hotel, or you can visit the discos, restaurants and shops of the other tunnels. It's a far cry from the frenzied days of 1969. China and the Soviet Union are back on speaking terms, but PLA patrols still keep daily watch along the border, even though the threat is less the Russians than the cold.
For us, the Soviets are soldiers, just like us. Because we're both humans, I don't have to be afraid of them.
It's the same in both countries. We're both soldiers, fulfilling our own duties and protecting our own motherlands.
These soldiers freely admit their job is as much to keep an eye on the locals as the Russians. Times have changed. The Cultural Revolution is in the past, and China has changed a lot since Mao died. In the 10 years under Deng Xiaoping, people have been able to get on with their lives again. There's been a sense of relaxed optimism as the country opened up to the outside world. But in China, the shadow of political turmoil is never far away. Mao's influence receded as Deng led the army out of politics and back to the barracks. But having once tasted political power, some find it hard to give up.
At that time, the army interfered openly to control the situation. To interfere is correct and has positive use. If you have time, please see Deng Xiaoping's collected works, page 336, July 1983, and you'll get a satisfactory answer.
The Cultural Revolution left the army with a problem. Do they interfere in the affairs of the people or not?
The Cultural Revolution was a special kind of movement, and in itself was a mistake. It might have appeared that the army was serving a purpose that was noble and great, but in fact, it was very bad use of the army. Now we feel that the army, in the eyes of all the people, has an influence that's not bad at all. The position of the army in the eyes of the people is okay.
In China, things can change very quickly.
In scenes reminiscent of the Cultural Revolution 20 years ago, this new wave of activists prepared to march on Tiananmen Square.
Soldiers and their commanders, surrounded by the citizens of Peking, would not fire on the people. They were the People's Army.
Tiananmen Square will end today, and it seems likely it will end in violence.
Attack on the armored personnel carrier and the tank, but everybody knows that the army has the power to do something about
those who could hardly credit that their own army was firing wildly at them. Many were bystanders.
The People's Army has never been used against the people.
And this is another page lifted from the Cultural Revolution.
Tell the world, they said to us.
All the Chinese people should stand up!
Coming up, a student of Jacques Cousteau sets off on his own to film one of the Atlantic Ocean's largest inhabitants, the basking shark. That's next, as the Discovery Signature series goes on a search for adventure.